Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are plunging right into one of the most persistent um, philosophical dilemmas that any spiritual seeker faces. We're moving beyond the physical battlefield of Kurukshetra and into that internal spiritual war.
Yes.
We're tackling the fifth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Karma Samnyasa Yoga.
Which translates, of course, to the yoga of action and knowledge.
And this really is a moment of truth for Arjuna, isn't it?
It absolutely is. If you recall from chapter 4, Lord Krishna praised two distinct paths that lead to the very same supreme realization.
Right, there was the discipline of knowledge, Jnana Yoga.
Which emphasizes renouncing action.
Right.
And then there was the discipline of action, or karma yoga, which is all about the selfless performance of your duty.
So Arjuna, who is, already desperate to avoid this fight and is looking for any respectable spiritual justification to quit.
He hears this and is, well, utterly confused.
He essentially heard Krishna say, Path A is great because you renounce everything, and Path B is also great because you act selflessly. He's just holding a contradiction.
He needs a straight answer.
He wants clarity. He wants the single best route. So, our mission today is to follow Krishna's precise resolution to this confusion. We're going to understand why the path of dedicated selfless action is actually declared, well, superior for the vast majority of us.
And crucially, how both of these paths ultimately converge on the exact same supreme reality.
So let's start right there with Arjuna's question. He comes at the very beginning of the chapter. He's looking for a tiebreaker.
He is. He forces the issue. Let's hear the shloka itself.
Samnyasa karmenta punaryoga kashasasi yatreya etayoreka tanme bruhi sunichitam.
And the translation is, Thou praisest, O Kotha, the renunciation of actions, Sakya Yoga, and again their unselfish performance, Karma Yoga. Tell me for certain which one of the two is decidedly conducive to my good.
You can just feel the urgency there. He wants the singular best way to salvation, the ultimate spiritual good, or shoyas. And we know from earlier chapters, his primary interest is abandoning the fight. He's trying to interpret the Lord's words on renunciation through his own desire to avoid all this bloodshed.
That is the crucial context. Arjuna is a sincere seeker, but his sincerity is, it's filtered through his existing aversion to violence. He sees renunciation, just dropping his weapons and leaving the battlefield, as the fast track to spiritual purity.
So Krishna has to handle this very carefully.
Yes. He first has to confirm the unity of the goal, and then immediately he has to prioritize the practical means.
So how does the Blessed Lord handle this? Does he side with the philosophers or the doers?
He responds right away, and he lays the foundation for the entire chapter in this next verse, verse 2. Translation. The Blessed Lord said, Samnyasa, discipline of knowledge, and Karma Yoga, discipline of action, both lead to salvation. But of the two, Karma Yoga is better than Sakya Yoga.
So the unity is confirmed right away. Both lead to Nishriyasa salvation, or as you said, perfect equanimity. But that ending statement, I find that fascinating. Karma Yoga is vishyate. It's declared superior. If the goal is the same, why choose one path over the other, especially when, the path of knowledge seems philosophically pure?
The preference is based entirely on practicality, on efficiency, really, for the embodied soul. The discipline of knowledge, or Sakya Yoga, requires a profound, already established dispassion. It requires the intellectual realization that the self is separate from the world, and that the world is, in a sense, unreal. Now, if a spiritual striver remains attached, even subtly, they just cannot succeed on this path.
So if you're still caught up in the world, trying to think your way out of it is almost impossible.
Exactly. That realization is incredibly difficult to sustain when you're still locked in a body that's subject to all this sensory input.
So if the body is like a complex machine constantly feeding you information, trying to simply know your way out of attachment is like trying to turn off the machine with pure thought.
Precisely. Karma Yoga, on the other hand, focuses on doing the action while renouncing the desire for the fruit of that action, the selfless performance of actions for the welfare of others. It naturally burns off attachment.
So you're using the very thing that binds you action as the tool for liberation.
You are. It is an indispensable art for getting rid of that egoistic sense of I and mine. Action becomes the easier, quicker means to get detached from worldly bondage because its central activity is the constant dismantling of self-interest.
And that immediately reframes what renunciation even means. It's not about external abandonment. It's not about quitting the battlefield or running off to a monastery.
No, it's about achieving a deep internal state of freedom.
So what does Krishna say defines this true perpetual renouncer?
He provides the definition of the nichasanyase, the perpetual renouncer, in verse 3.
Janasa nichasanyasi yonateti na kokati nirvanvo hi mahabo sukha bandhat pramuchai.
Translation. He who neither hates nor desires should be known as a sannyasi renouncer. For free from dualities, pairs of opposites, he is released easily from bondage, O mighty armed Arjuna.
So true renunciation is entirely internal.
Entirely. It's defined by being free from dve, which is hatred, aversion, or dislike, and kokati, which is desire, attachment, affinity. A karma yogi, someone working selflessly, inherently possesses this spirit.
Because service itself requires transcending both. If you're truly serving, you can't be attached to the results for yourself and you can't be averse to the work.
You can't. And the removal of these two forces, desire and aversion, is what removes the dualities, the nirvana. And the Gita says these are the primary stumbling blocks to God realization.
And when those are gone, liberation comes easily.
It does. But the real challenge here, which the commentaries really highlight, is the renunciation of subtle pride.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
The most dangerous attachment isn't for ordinary evils. Those are obvious, they're easy to reject. It's like throwing away iron cuffs. The most subtle attachment is the pride of doing good.
The pride of doing good.
Yes, that egoism that settles in the sense of I am the one serving others or I am the virtuous one. This is like a gold ornament. It's beautiful, it's disguised as a virtue, and because of that, it's incredibly hard to discard.
Wait, you're saying the pride of doing good is more disastrous than ordinary evil? That's very counterintuitive. Most people think their good deeds will save them.
Well, philosophically, if you perform actions with attachment, even good ones, you create merit, or sutta, and that still binds you to the cycle of rebirth.
To a good birth, but a birth nonetheless.
Exactly. Bondage means attachment to the perishable world, and it doesn't matter if the chains are made of iron or gold. The pride of idness, of having done something great, is an affinity for the perishable ego. The true renouncer has to root out this subtle egoism.
So if action is the best tool for chipping away at that ego, and true renunciation is an internal state that's available even to the active person, then Krishna has to solidify this idea that these paths ultimately merge.
Yes, he condemns those who argue for their separation. The focus now really shifts to intellectual clarity. We can turn to verse 4.
Sohyogo padargabala pravadantin napata sitama biastita samyugubayor vindit phalam.
Translation. The ignorant, not the wise, speak of the discipline of knowledge, Zolpyoga, and discipline of action, Karma Yoga, as different. He who is well established in one gets the fruit of both.
The ignorant balo children. That's a strong word.
It is. He's saying those who claim that the discipline of knowledge and the discipline of action lead to different results are essentially spiritual children. The wise, the patak, understand that the final result, God realization, is exactly the same, whether you start with action or with knowledge.
But if the result is the same, why do people perceive them as different systems? Is it just a difference in method or a difference in spiritual development?
It is entirely a difference in methodology and, initial inclination. The Lord is so insistent here because he wants to dispel the notion that knowledge is somehow an exclusive or superior result. He confirms this shared destination in the very next verse.
Yatsahi prapyat sani tajogerapi kamyate kasahya kayoga kaya pashati sapashati.
Translation. The supreme state which is attained by the Sakya Yogi is reached by the Karma Yogi also. He who sees that the ways, as a result of Sakya Yoga and Karma Yoga, are one, he sees truly.
So, he who sees them as one, he sees truly.
Yes, and notice the inclusion of the word api, which means also. It's there to ensure that you understand the path of action is an independent and equally valid route to that supreme state. But more profoundly, this emphasizes their mutual necessity.
Meaning you can't perfect one without the principles of the other.
Exactly. A karma yogi must eventually adopt the discrimination of the jnana yogi, distinguishing the sentient self from the insentient body to truly give up attachment.
And conversely,
the jnana yogi must adopt the method of the karma yogi by not performing actions for himself. He still acts, but only for the maintenance of the world.
So the end state is liberation, which is only achieved when that affinity for the world is completely gone.
Completely. The paths are just different entry gates to the same unified courtyard. A wise person sees the single identity of the goal, and that's why they aren't disturbed by the difference in the means.
This realization of unity then allows Krishna to really re-emphasize that tiebreaker from verse 2. He has to give Arjuna and us a compelling reason why action is the preferred, superior discipline for most people.
He states this very clearly in verse 6, where he details the difficulty of the knowledge path.
Sanyasastu mahabaho du kampumayogata yogayukto munir brahma nasiriti gachati.
Translation. But the discipline of knowledge, O mighty armed Arjuna, is difficult to attain without the discipline of action. The sage who is earnest in karma yoga, the discipline of action, quickly attains to the absolute.
Difficult to attain without the discipline of action. That's the key phrase.
It is. Dusam aptam ayogata. The difficulty of pure Sakya Yoga for an embodied being is that it requires profound dispassion before you've done the work of purification. If you're still attached to the world, and you inevitably are, or you wouldn't be seeking, you just can't grasp the deep discrimination required to mentally renounce all action.
It's like trying to build a complex, perfect roof when the foundations of the house are still shaky.
That's a great analogy.
So karma yoga is the practical discipline that strengthens the foundation first.
It is. Since an embodied being cannot entirely abandon all action, the practical discipline is to renounce the desire for the fruit of that action. When actions are performed for the welfare of others without selfish motive, attachment is naturally wiped out.
And that's why the sage, who is earnest in action, the muni, attains God realization. Nasirya.
Quickly, without delay or the need for other means. The persistent dedication to selfless work makes success not just possible but certain and swift.
Okay, so since karma yoga is the practical route to quick attainment, Krishna then outlines a portrait of the perfected person on this path, the individual who is detached, even while being fully engaged in the world.
Yes, what the pure Yoga Yukta looks like. This perfected state is detailed through 4 primary attributes in verse 7.
Yagayukto vishuddhatma vijitatma jitendriya sarvapu katama kurvanapi na lipyate.
Translation. The karma yogi, whose mind is quite pure, who has controlled his body, who has subdued his senses, and whose self is the self of all beings, is not tainted by actions though he acts.
A fourfold purity.
Yes, and it moves from the external to the internal. First, jitendriya, subdued senses. The senses must be controlled, free from attachment and aversion, to make sure you can use them for selfless service without getting cold off course.
Then the body.
Right, vijitatma, a controlled body. Renouncing bodily comfort, avoiding laziness. This ensures the action itself is disciplined and focused on the duty, not on your personal ease.
And then the mind.
A pure mind, Vishuddhatma. This is achieved by fixing your sole aim on God realization. This clarity of purpose, this high aim, purifies the mind more quickly than just, aimless good works.
And then the final one, which seems to be the foundation of it all, sarvavotatma vutatma, identifying yourself with the self of all beings.
Yes.
I want to spend a moment on that one. How does identifying the self with all beings prevent that subtle pride and doership we were just talking about?
The core realization is unity. Think of your own body. If you injure your hand, your leg doesn't feel pride when it runs to get a bandage.
No, of course not.
It serves the injured hand automatically because it realizes they are part of the same organism. Similarly, when a sage realizes the soul of all beings is their own self, service to others happens automatically without the taint of pride, ego, or the sense of, I am the great benefactor.
That reframes the entire concept of charity or service. It's not an obligation you perform.
It's a natural function, like breathing. And because the karma yogi acts without selfish motive and realizes this universal identity, he renounces the sense of doership. And so, kurvanapi na lipyate, he is not tainted by actions even though he acts. His actions are transformed into a kind of spiritual inaction because the binding elements, the desire for fruit and the ego, are just absent.
Okay, so we've examined the karma yogi's active detachment. Now Krishna shifts perspective to the tattvavid,
The knower of truth.
the one following Sio Yoga. His realization isn't based on selfless service, but on pure discrimination, seeing what is real and what is illusion.
And that tattvavid must maintain a state of non-doership. This is often called the Great Soul's realization, and it's described across verses 8 and 9, which lists this huge array of actions that are constantly being performed.
Naiva kinchit karomiti yukto munyatatavid pashanyan vanshinanga chansva panche samprabhava misantanam minamyanapi indriyarte varpasanta iti harayan.
Translation. The man who is united with the divine and knows the truth believes, even though seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, walking, sleeping, breathing, speaking, emitting, grasping, opening and closing the eyes, that he does nothing. He holds that the senses move among the sense objects.
That list covers everything. Actions we do intentionally, like speaking or grasping, and actions totally beyond our control, like breathing, sleeping, even the growth of our bodies. And the Tatvivit looks at all of this and declares,
Naiva kinchit karomi, I do nothing at all.
that is the height of discrimination.
It is. The philosophical insight is that all these actions, the social, the individual, the conscious, the unconscious, are performed by praking.
By nature.
By nature, specifically by the evolutes of nature. The body, senses, mind, intellect, and life breath. The self is permanent and distinct from all of these.
But practically, maintaining that realization must be incredibly taxing. If I trip over my own foot, my mind immediately registers I tripped. How does the knower of truth maintain that separation in the moment of action?
By focusing on that final clause. Indriyatirtio vartanta iti tarayan.
The senses move among the sense objects.
Yes. The Tatvivit realizes that the senses and the objects they interact with are both modes of nature. The self is merely the illuminator, the witness, not the actor. It's like waking up from a nightmare. Once you're awake, you no longer identify with the fear or the actions you performed in the dream.
Wow.
The knower of truth, by identifying with the imperishable self, renounces that egoistic error of identifying with the active, ever-changing evolutes of nature. Egoism, that sense of I do, is the error that this realization completely destroys.
So we have the active detachment of the Karma Yogi and the intellectual discrimination, the Sankhya Yogi. Krishna now shows how the third great path, the path of devotion, Bhakti Yoga, achieves the exact same result of non-attachment.
It does. This is detailed in verse 10, which gives us one of the most classical analogies for the state of non-taint.
Brahmyataya kamaish sageteksvakaroti yalipyata nasapapina padmapatramivam.
Translation: He who performs actions, offering them to God and abandoning attachment, is not tainted by sin, just as a lotus leaf is not tainted by water.
The lotus leaf. It's such a beautiful image. The leaf sits right on the water, totally immersed in its environment, yet it stays completely dry. So the action is performed, the devotee is fully engaged in the world, but the result, whether it's merit or demerit, it just doesn't stick.
And that non-stickiness is achieved by abandoning saga, attachment, and the sense of mine. The commentaries emphasize that attachment is the fundamental root of all sin. It's the chief cause of the soul's continuous birth into good and evil wombs.
So by offering everything to God,
The devotee bypasses the ego that wants to claim ownership over the results. The core action here is Brahmantyataya karmashi, offering all actions to God. The devotee following this path regards the body, the senses, the mind, everything as belonging to God. He sees himself as just an instrument, a humble servant, using tools that are not his own.
So if we compare the three paths so far, the Karma Yogi offers actions and instruments to the world for its welfare. The Jnana Yogi offers them to nature by seeing nature as the true agent.
Right.
But the Bhakti Yogi offers everything to God, who is the master of both the world and nature. This is, maybe the surest path for renouncing that sense of mine.
And having covered these paths, Krishna now returns to define the ultimate purpose of the Karma Yogi's activity, and this ties directly back to why it's the superior practical discipline.
This purpose is made explicit in verse 11.
Kayana manasa buchya, kavalendriyarapi yojina karma kurvanti sagavtaktatmashutai.
Translation: The yogis, men of action, having abandoned attachment, perform actions merely with the body, mind, intellect, or merely with the senses for the purification of the self.
Heart. And there's the aim, atmashutai, for the purification of the self.
So this purification is the same as totally renouncing the ego and that sense of mine.
It is. They perform actions using all their instruments, the body, mind, intellect, kayena manasa buddhya, but they treat these instruments as borrowed tools. They belong to the world, they're meant for service, not for personal gain.
The text uses the plural adjective kiva merely to describe using the senses. That suggests a very comprehensive abandonment of attachment.
It does. To the entire world. The senses are used merely as mechanical means, completely devoid of affinity. And this affinity for the body, the senses, the world, it's not real. It's just assumed.
Because these things are constantly changing and will eventually abandon us anyway.
Exactly. So the Karma Yogi uses action as a constant spiritual workout to root out this false sense of mine. Every selfless action is a repetition, a kind of muscle memory exercise in realizing, this is not for me. These tools are not mine.
And when that subtle sense of mind is totally renounced, the heart is purified and the egoism just perishes.
So if the purification of the self is the goal, then the most immediate mechanism for bondage has to be addressed.
Attachment to the fruit of action. Why is that specific attachment so binding?
Well, verse 12 gives us a direct, necessary contrast between the liberated soul and the bound soul.
Yukta karma phala tyaptva shantimapnoti ne ikimayukta kamakarin fails sakto nibalyat.
Translation. The soul earnest, devoted, attains to everlasting peace, God realization, by abandoning attachment to the fruit of action, whereas he who works with a selfish motive, being attached to the fruit of actions through desire, is bound.
So the yukta, the earnest soul, attains yantya apnoti naintikam everlasting peace.
By abandoning the desire for the result. Conversely, the ayukta, the non-earnest soul working with selfish motive, kamakaryan, is nibadyata. He's bound.
Bound to the cycle of birth and death.
Right.
So the binding force isn't the action or even the fruit itself, it's the egoistic expectation of the fruit. This is where I think intellectual clarity is really needed. If I'm a surgeon performing an operation for the welfare of a patient, I have to desire a positive outcome for that patient.
Of course.
So is the Gita commanding me to work without caring about the outcome?
That is a vital clarification. No, the karma yogi must act with scrupulous promptness and care. He's not acting like an insane man without an aim. But his ultimate aim is God realization and the welfare of others, not his personal acquisition of pleasure or honor or prestige from that successful surgery.
So it's about shifting the motivation. The desire has to be selfless for the world, not selfish for the ego.
Exactly. The commentaries clarify that the fruit of actions can be classified in all these different ways: immediate, unforeseen, received, unreceived. But the common thread is that attachment to any of these results, which are all perishable, keeps the soul tied to the transitory world. The binding element is the identification with the result. Renounce the desire for personal gain, and you are liberated from the taint of the action. After detailing the active detachment of the karma yogi, Krishna now pivots back. He elaborates on the deep internal realization of the Sakya yogi.
And he does this through one of the Gita's most beautiful and, I think, relatable metaphors.
The nine-gated city. Yes, so let's hear verse 13.
Sarvakarmach manasa sanyasyaste sukharva vashinavadvare pure dehi naiva kurvan na karayan.
Translation. The embodied soul, who has controlled his senses, having renounced the doership of all actions mentally by discrimination in the city of nine gates, neither acting nor causing others to act, rests happily in the self.
The body is the Navadvara pure, the city of nine gates. That's the 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, the mouth, and the 2 lower orifices. The soul, the Dehi, is the resident within this city. I see this as such a radical form of detachment. You are the resident, not the city itself.
And this realization is the key to achieving true happiness. Asta sukha, resting happily. Most people mistake the city of the body for their home, the self.
Which leads to constant anxiety because the city is impermanent and it's constantly decaying.
Exactly. But the Sashyogi, who is Vashi, a master of his senses, performs manasa sanyasya, a mental renunciation of doership. He realizes through discrimination that the soul is separate from the physical actions and processes of the body.
So the body is the field of action. It's constantly in motion, acting and being acted upon. But the soul,
The soul, the supreme self dwelling within, naiva kurvana karayan. It neither acts nor causes others to act. All human beings technically dwell in the self, which is perfect and uniform, but they mistakenly believe they rest in the body. The great soul, knowing the truth, realizes this separation and rests happily in that non-dual self. It's an immediate realization of liberation, just by shifting where you believe you reside.
Okay, so if the soul is not the doer, and the body is just acting out nature's mandates, does God decree our actions and results? This gets to a fundamental theological question. Is God responsible for my suffering or my virtue?
Krishna provides a definitive answer here. It's about the Lord's impartiality and non-agency, and we see it in verses 14 and 15. Translation. Neither agency nor actions does the Lord create for the world, nor does he connect actions with their fruits. But it is personal nature alone that acts.
That's a powerful statement. The Lord, the Prabhu, is impartial. He doesn't create the sense of doership or kartatva for anyone, nor does he connect actions to their fruits.
He doesn't.
So if God doesn't create doership or assign the rewards, who does?
It is the individual's svabhava, your personal nature, your propensity. That's what acts. This means the entire dependence on karma and its fruits is self-created through ignorance and attachment.
And that clarifies why liberation is even possible.
Yes, if God had made man the doer, liberation from action would be impossible. But since the sense of doership is self-made, it is within man's power to renounce it through knowledge.
Which brings us to verse 15.
Indeed.
Date kasyatit pa na kaiva sukata vivu ajanadovta ajanatanamuyenti chantava.
Translation: The all-pervading Lord takes neither the sin nor the virtue of any. Knowledge is enveloped by ignorance. Therefore, beings are deluded.
So the Lord Vibhu is all-pervading and impartial. He takes neither the sin nor the virtue.
It's the sun analogy again. The sun illuminates everything, good and bad, but the observer chooses how to use that light. The problem is the veil of imperfect knowledge, ajananavatam janam.
Knowledge is enveloped by ignorance.
Yes, and when the self assumes affinity with the insentient body and its activities, the being, the jantava, becomes deluded. They think they are the doer and the enjoyer, and so they take on the taint of sin or virtue. They're deluded simply because they lack discrimination.
And since ignorance is the root cause of this delusion, the logical next step is describing how true knowledge destroys that veil, illuminating the Supreme Self.
And verse 16 uses a magnificent image to describe this illumination. Translation: But to those whose ignorance is destroyed by knowledge, discrimination, that knowledge lights up the Supreme Self like the sun.
Lights up the Supreme Self like the sun.
Knowledge here is active discrimination, realizing that the self is permanent, certain, and uniform, while that sense of I and mine attached to the body is transitory. When this discrimination fully takes hold, the self realizes its identity with the Supreme Self, and the darkness of ignorance is dispelled instantly.
And this realization isn't a single event. It creates a state of merger, a progression toward God.
Yes, and verse 17 details this progression. It shows 4 stages of consciousness entirely merged into the divine. Translation: Those whose mind and intellect are wholly merged in God, who remain constantly established in identity with Him, and have finally become one with Him, their sins being wiped out by wisdom, reach the state from which there is no return.
These are powerful indicators of complete realization.
They are. The striver moves from intellectual absorption, tadabuthai, to the mind thinking of Him only, tadatmana. Then to constant establishment in that identity, tanayai, and finally becoming tatpadaya.
An embodiment of God.
Where the separate egoistic notion is just lost. And because attachment to the unreal world, which is what causes rebirth, is totally renounced, their kamayo, their sins and virtues, are wiped out. And they attain apuna avatya.
The state for which there is no return to the mortal world.
This high state of realization must, of course, transform how the sage interacts with the world.
And this is where we get Samadarshina, equal vision. This is probably one of the most practically challenging concepts in the Gita.
It is, and it's challenging precisely because people often mistake equal vision for equal conduct. Let's look at verse 18. Translation: Sages see with an equal eye a learned and humble Brahman, a cow, an elephant, or even a dog or a pariah outcast, and have a vision of God in all of them.
So the sage is beholding the Lord, pervading equally in the soul of all these diverse beings, from the one society respects for learning, the Brahman, to the outcast, the Shivaka. The bodies and external qualities are different.
But the indwelling self is uniform.
But practically, doesn't this demand an almost superhuman mental stability? How do you maintain social decorum while seeing a cow and a learned man with the same eye? If I see a dog approaching and a person approaching, my conduct toward them has to be different for societal order to function.
And that is the essential distinction. Equal vision means the perception of the inner reality is uniform. It does not imply equal dealings or equal conduct. Conduct must always adhere to societal decorum and practical reality. If your own body is one, you still treat your forehead differently than you treat your foot. Similarly, the wise see equality in the soul, but deal with the outer manifestation. The quality is the caste, the species, according to the world's need, but without any personal attachment, aversion, or pride.
So their focus is solely on removing the suffering of others. That distinction, vision versus conduct, is vital. And this equanimity, this samya, leads to liberation right now.
In this life. as confirmed in verse 19.
Ihaivatarchita sargo yuthansthita maneradoni samaramatasmadarama diastita.
Translation. Even here, the world is overcome by those whose minds are established in equality because God is flawless and equal. Therefore, they are established in God, Brahma.
Even here, Ihaiva, they conquer the world in this life.
Yes. And why? Because God is nirdu, flawless and equanimous. Flaws, heterogeneity, dualities, these are all born from man's affinity for the unreal kaleidoscopic world. When that affinity is totally renounced, the person becomes flawless, becomes equanimous, and is naturally established in God.
Let's trace the psychological markers of this liberated state. It seems to be characterized by a perfect mental stability when it comes to the inevitable pairs of opposites, pleasure and pain.
Yes, and this stability is defined in verse 20.
Na praipya prapya no vijit prapya kapriyam stirobhutira sammohar brahmavid brahmashita.
Translation. He who neither rejoices on obtaining what is pleasant nor grieves on obtaining what is unpleasant, and who is firm of understanding and undiluted, such a knower of God is established in God.
So the knowledge of the self is permanent and uniform. Oh, that makes the intellect sthirabhuti, firm of understanding.
Right. And since they see the transitory nature of the world, they are asamaka.
Unbewildered.
They don't mistake the perishable world for reality. And this is what allows them to remain free from joy or grief when they face pleasure or pain. And this realization, in turn, opens the door to internal bliss, which is independent of circumstance. Verse 21 describes this shift from external reliance to internal fulfillment.
Translation.
When the soul, self, is no longer attached to external contexts, objects, he finds happiness in the self. Having completely identified himself through meditation with Brahma, God, he enjoys eternal bliss.
So happiness from external objects is fleeting. It's rajasa. But when attachment to those external contexts, Bhayasparshiva Saktatma is removed.
The soul naturally experiences sattvika, or pure happiness. And that leads to sukham akayam, eternal, undiminishing bliss.
And this inherent limitation of sensory pleasure is why the wise person has to reject it, which is outlined in the next verse, 22.
Yehi sasprashao bugadukayonaya evate adyantavanta kunteyam natauramate buddha.
Translation. The pleasures that are born of contacts with objects are only sources of pain. They have a beginning and an end, O son of Kunti, Arjuna. No wise man delights in them.
The key understanding here is that sensual pleasures, sasprashajvuga, aren't just transitory, adyantavanto. They are intrinsically sources of pain.
Sources of pain, how so?
Well, they cause pain through the loss of energy, the grief of losing the object itself, and then there's saskara dukkha, the pain from the latent impressions that demand repetition of the pleasure, and also the pain of not being able to acquire them again. Since the self is permanent, it cannot derive lasting happiness from something that has a beginning and an end. The wise person knows this limitation and seeks permanent happiness within.
This wisdom, this understanding that true pleasure is internal, allows the yogi to tackle the final, most visceral obstacle, the powerful impulses of desire and anger. And Krishna delivers a direct command for immediate application. He says, even here.
This verse is often cited as the practical measure of a yogi's success. It demands control right here, right now, in this life. Translation. He who is able to resist the impulse, rush, born out of desire and anger, even here before he gives up his body, is a yogi, and he is a happy man.
So, before the dissolution of the body, Brakshara Vimukana, this is a task for this very lifetime, not some future one.
Absolutely. The Lord commands the striver to control the powerful urges, the vega, the sheer rush or impulse of kama, desire, and krodha, anger.
I see the desire-anger link now. Desire is the root. It arises from identifying the self with the unreal, which creates a false sense of lack. And if that desire is frustrated,
anger is born. The challenge, the real practice, is catching the vega, that initial surge, before it becomes a tidal wave of emotion. That is the crucial instruction for the aspiring yogi. He must use his human capacity for discrimination to resist the impulse the moment the thought of desire or anger arises.
And the ability to resist that impulse is what prevents all the disquietude and struggle.
And it makes the person established in perfect equanimity. Only he who achieves this control truly deserves the title of a man, a nara, because animals are constantly swayed by these impulses. The mastery of this impulse immediately makes him a yogi and a sukhinata, a happy man. And these next few verses powerfully show the convergence of all the paths toward this state of liberation. First, it describes the Sukyogi's internal fulfillment in verse 24.
Yunto sukontera mastatantariotereva yasayogi brahmanirvaka brahmabhuto digachat.
Translation. He who is happy within himself, God, who rejoices within himself and who is illumined within himself, that yogi identified with Brahma attains to the beatitude of God, Brahma Nirva.
This is a life lived entirely inward, finding happiness, antasukha, delight, antararma, and illumination, antarjyotiyo, all within the self. The mind, controlled by discrimination, is constantly fixed on the permanent, leading to that state of brahmabhuta.
Identified with Brahma. But this perfect internal state is also achieved by the active sage. This is juxtaposed beautifully in the very next verse, which confirms the success of the selfless server.
Labante brahmanirvakaman chinadvaidiyatad manasarvabhutayitarato.
Translation. The holy men whose sins are destroyed, whose doubts, dualities are cut asunder, whose minds are disciplined, and who rejoice in doing good to all beings attain to the beatitude of God.
Who rejoice in doing good to all beings. Sarvabhutayitarat.
Yes, and this proves once again that selfless action isn't just a stepping stone. It is an independent and sufficient means to wipe out the egoistic notion, to cut asunder dualities, chinadvaita, and attain Brahma.
And for those seeking a practical method for achieving this internal focus, Krishna provides a brief description of the meditation technique dhyana in verses 27 and 28.
Sparinketva bahirbahi shevantare, pruvo prapano samaupiturna sabyantarakario yatendrio manobutir munir mukaparayatam vigatecha bhayakrodo yasada mukta evasa.
Translation.
Yeah.
Shutting out all external objects, fixing the vision between the eyebrows, making the inward and the outward breath moving within the nostrils, the sage, who has controlled the senses, mind, and intellect, who is intent on liberation, who has cast away desire, fear, and anger, is ever liberated.
This outlines the deliberate, rigorous control required for meditation. Sporshan katva bahirbahyan, not allowing external objects to occupy the mind.
And the instruction to control paraya, the exhalation, and apana, the inhalation.
It's about regulating the breath to be even, gentle, and subtle. This ensures the mind remains fixed on mokkaparitam, on liberation, as the supreme aim. The sage who controls his entire instrument, panel senses, mind, and intellect, and casts away the root evils of desire, fear, and anger, is declared sadamukta evasa.
Ever liberated.
After resolving these dualities and describing the liberated state achievable through both action and knowledge, Krishna concludes the chapter.
And he does it by describing the ultimate knowledge of the Lord that ensures instantaneous peace. This brings the path of devotion right into the forefront as the supreme attainment, unifying all three paths.
And verse 29 provides the three core attributes of the Lord that, when realized, immediately dismantle the three major stumbling blocks to spiritual freedom. Translation. He, having known me as the enjoyer of all sacrifices and austerities, the great Lord of all the worlds and the disinterested friend of all beings, attains peace.
This is where the practical application of this knowledge becomes stunningly clear. Krishna gives us a trinity of realization, designed to remove the root obstacles of desire, possession, and fear. What is the greatest practical benefit of internalizing this trinity?
Well, it leads to santyachati, the attainment of supreme peace. Let's look at how the three attributes dismantle the major stumbling blocks. First, bhaktara yanyata pase.
The enjoyer of all sacrifices.
This removes personal desire. If you truly realize that the Lord is the ultimate enjoyer of all your actions, all your sacrifices and austerities, then the ego's desire to acquire pleasure for itself or to even claim doership is just eliminated.
Okay, then the second, sarvalkamaheshvaram.
The great Lord of all worlds. This removes the sense of mine and possession. If you realize that God is the absolute controller and owner of the entire creation, you can no longer cling to the illusion that your body, your possessions, or your relationships are truly yours.
And the third, Suddha Sarvabhutan.
The disinterested friend of all beings. This removes worry, fear, and any disinclination for God. The omnipotent power you might fear is actually your impartial, protective friend. Why would you worry when the great Lord, who enjoys everything and owns everything, is also your dedicated friend?
The commentaries indicate that accepting just one of these three facts automatically translates the other two into practice. That suggests tremendous immediate power.
It does.
If I accept God as the great Lord and owner, My sense of possession evaporates,
Yeah.
and simultaneously my fear and my desire for personal enjoyment are just gone.
The knowledge leads to instantaneous transformation. This final verse synthesizes the entire chapter by showing that the path to supreme peace, whether you take it through action, knowledge, or devotion, relies on this ultimate unified understanding of the self and the supreme.
We have completed our deep dive into Chapter 5, Karma Samyasa Yoga. Krishna has systematically resolved Arjuna's dilemma, confirming that while both action, karma yoga, and knowledge, jnana yoga, lead to the same liberation, the discipline of action is the practical and superior means for the embodied soul.
Because it actively dismantles that egoistic affinity for the world.
We learn that true samyasa is not physical abandonment. It's the internal state of non-attachment, free from hatred and desire, that transforms all action into a kind of spiritual inaction.
The key takeaway is really synthesis. The goal is not to stop acting, but to master the art of acting without attachment and ego. The enlightened soul, regardless of their starting path, has to achieve the equanimity of unified vision, realize the identity of the self with Brahma, and conquer the powerful inner forces of desire and anger in this life.
It is only then that we overcome the world and attain the eternal peace from which there is no return.
As you contemplate these profound shifts in perspective, we'll leave you with 3 challenges for self-inquiry based on this chapter.
First, the Lord emphasized controlling the immediate rush, the vegan, of desire and anger before the dissolution of the body. Identify one specific daily trigger, a traffic jam, an irritating email, a yearning for an unnecessary purchase, and practice recognizing that impulse and consciously choosing renunciation over reaction, thus proving yourself to be a yogi right here and now.
Second, meditate deeply on the analogy of the 9-gated city. If you truly understood your body, senses, and possessions as tools belonging temporarily to the world, meant only for service, how would that fundamentally change your attachment to physical health, material security, or sensory pleasure?
And third, if you were to internalize just one of God's attributes from verse 29 as enjoyer, to eliminate desire, as great Lord, to eliminate possession, or as disinterested friend, to eliminate fear and worry, which single attribute would you choose to focus on this week to dismantle your core emotional stumbling block? And what immediate practical difference would that realization make in your mental stability?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the fusion of action and knowledge. We look forward to exploring the next stage of yoga with you soon.